Current geopolitical tensions resemble the Cold War in some ways, but they are unfolding in a changed world. After the end of the Cold War, the world briefly appeared unipolar under US leadership, but new power blocks are now forming. At the same time, the global financial system is burdened with unprecedented debt, while technological revolutions such as artificial intelligence are fundamentally transforming society and the economy. Our report examines the parallels and differences between the Cold War era and today's situation, looks at debt-driven crisis and then and now, analyzes hotspots from Eastern Europe to South America, and assesses the likelihood of a global conflict that could establish a new world order. Finally, we will highlight the lessons that can be drawn from all this to protect your wealth. So stay until the end, it becomes very interesting. The Cold War shaped the second half of the 20th century as a bipolar confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union at that time. There were two clearly defined blocs, the capitalists, West, versus the communists, East, and an ideological arms race with nuclear deterrence. Today, however, the situation is more complex and multipolar. Many observers speak of a possible new Cold War, but it would be very different from the Cold War of the 20th century. Instead of a US-Soviet duopoly, we now see an emerging alliance between China and Russia on one side and the US with its allies NATO, European Union, Japan, etc. on the other side. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 deepened this divide and widened the rift between the Western Alliance and the forming autocratic partnership. China and Russia increasingly act in concert, for example through coordinated military maneuvers, and position themselves against the US-dominated world order. However, the rules of the game are fundamentally different. China is deeply intervened with the global economy, unlike the largely isolated Soviet-planned economy of the past. Historians such as Neil Ferguson stress that in the 21st century, the roles have been reversed. China is now the giant and Russia is the junior partner, whereas the Soviet Union was militarily on par with the US. China today is primarily economically powerful while being deeply connected with Western economies. This interdependence makes the new Cold War very different. A full decoupling between China and the West would be far more painful and difficult than the old East-West divide. Moreover, the dividing line is ideologically less clear than between 1945 to 1990. Today, it is more about authoritarian versus democratic systems and spheres of influence rather than communism versus capitalism. Nevertheless, new blocs are emerging. NATO has expanded eastward since the Cold War has ended, most recently to formerly neutral countries like Sweden and Finland. Russia views this as a threat and uses it to justify its aggressive policy toward Ukraine. China, meanwhile, has formed a de facto strategic axis with Russia, keeping Russia's economy alive despite sanctions, which some interpreted as the beginning of a second Cold War. Western experts intensely debate how to handle this new dilemma. It's called dualism. The conclusion is clear. History does not repeat itself exactly, but certain patterns, power blocks, arm races, propaganda battles are resurfacing. One key difference between then and now lies in the economic foundation. Today's global economy is leveraged with debt at unprecedented levels. Governments, corporations and households worldwide together have amassed more than 300 trillion in debt, around 307 trillion US dollars as of 2023. That equals roughly 336% of global GDP. By comparison, even after the Great Depression before World War II, debt levels were far lower. This enormous debt load makes the financial system fragile. Rising interest rates and lower growth quickly turn high debt ratios into solvency crisis. The 2024 UN report called A World of Debt warned that global debt is at historic high, pushing especially developing countries into crisis. And crisis often means war. The situation recalls the late 1920s and 1930s before World War II. A combination of over-indebtedness, stock market crash and protectionism triggered the Great Depression. Economic collapse paved the way for radical political forces. The lesson? Excessive debt and economic breakdown can massively exacerbate geopolitical tensions. At the same time, economic and geopolitical power centers are shifting. China has rapidly caught up with the US in the recent decades and, in some measures, has overtaken it. By purchasing power parity, China has been the world's largest economy since 2016. This rise is fundamentally altering the global balance of power. Meanwhile, the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus new members like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Egypt, openly seek to overturn the current order. The US has also transformed. It is now the world's largest oil and gas producer thanks to the fracking revolution. This reduces dependency on Middle Eastern oil, reshaping America's geopolitical interests. At the same time, energy exports and sanctions are increasingly used as political weapons, pushing countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia closer together, often under China's wing. And because all of these changes in the world, conflicts are flaring across multiple regions. Let me just get a few of them. Russia's war in Ukraine, the largest conventional war in Europe since 1945, has entrenched a dangerous stalemate. Israel faces Iran-backed groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, while Iran pursues regional dominance and nuclear ambitions. In Latin America, we have Venezuela, rich in oil but collapsed economically, has become a proxy battleground for the US versus Russia-China. And East Asia, tensions rise in South China Sea and around Taiwan. The hotspots are not isolated, but interconnected, symptoms of a crumbling global order. Some experts, such as Philip Zelikow, warn of a 20 to 30% chance of a world war in the near future. Large public sees a world war, likely within the next 10 to 15 years. However, when we see the news at the moment, a world war could even become very, very realistic within the next 2 to 3 years. While geopolitical risks mount, a technological upheaval is underway. Artificial intelligence. Some compare its impact to the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. AI could transform economics, work, and warfare as radically as steam engines, electricity, and mass productions once did. And this AI race has geopolitical consequences. Whoever dominates AI will wield economic and military power. The US and China are investing billions, while Europe struggles to keep pace. Some even call it an AI Cold War. AI, however, is not only a threat. It could also drive productivity, medical advances, and solutions for climate change. The outcome depends on how societies adapt, regulate, and prepare for disruptions. History shows that crises often wipe out personal fortunes. From German savers ruined by hyperinflation in the 1920s to families losing everything in World War II. Similar risks are today. Currency collapse, stock market crashes, or even expropriations in extreme crises. That's why let's shift the report to Paulson Partners, our company who is specialized in protecting and diversifying assets globally. And that's exactly the key, because we never know exactly in which direction we are heading, especially in times of industrial revolutions and potential global new world orders. What you have to focus on, to use a strategy that is called the flag theory. The flag theory means very simple: we don't put all eggs in the same basket. We diversify through jurisdictions and we diversify through assets. That's exactly what we do. The world is changing, perhaps at the threshold of a new historical chapter. Whether the transition is peaceful or violent will shape our future, but we still don't know. But individuals can act now to safeguard their wealth and stability.